Imagine building your life on a memory, only to discover that the memory was a lie. Imagine that the person who shared your bed for 16 years was secretly sharing another life with the people closest to you. This is the story of Morgan, who in a single day discovered that she had lost her husband, lost her sister, and lost her trust in everything she thought she knew. And this is the story of Clara, the daughter who found herself in the middle of a battle between the truth she sees and the truth she refuses to accept. How does a family recover from such an explosion? How do you build a future when your past collapses? This is what Colleen Hoover's novel Regretting seeks to answer. A journey into the depths of a wounded heart and the possibility of healing. Welcome, BookTube listeners. This is Khalid Atitullah Salama Ahmed. What you just heard was not merely a dramatic scene, but the very heart and essence of the novel we will be discussing today, Regretting You. Colleen Hoover, the author who has mastered the art of transforming emotional pain into powerful literary texts, presents us with something different in this novel. It is not simply a conventional love story between a man and a woman, but rather a love story between a mother and her daughter at the most difficult and painful moments of their lives. So, what makes this novel stand out? It dares to touch on profound existential questions. Is sacrificing for one's family a free choice we consciously make, or an obligation imposed upon us? And can a person regret their choices, even when those choices have given them the most precious things they own? In this 40-minute episode, we will embark together on a comprehensive analytical journey, exploring the novel through 4 key stages. First, we will conduct an in-depth psychological analysis of each character, uncovering their motivations, fears, and hidden contradictions. Second, we will search for the underlying symbols and subtle meanings that weave the fabric of the story and give it a greater depth. Third, we will pause at the pivotal scenes that altered the course of events and reshaped the characters' destinies. Finally, we will raise philosophical and existential questions that invite us to reflect on our own lives, relationships, and choices. So prepare yourselves for a rich literary journey, and let us begin. Let us begin with Morgan, the beating heart of the novel. When we first meet her, we see a woman in her early 30s, but if we dig a little deeper, we discover that part of her remained stuck at the age of 17. This is not merely a metaphor, it is a psychological reality. Morgan married the love of her life, Chris, at 17, and shortly afterward gave birth to her daughter, Clara. In our society, early marriage and early motherhood are often portrayed as a dream come true, but Hoover dares to ask a bold question: does every dream inevitably turn into a blessing? Let us imagine together a 17-year-old girl with dreams, ambitions, and a desire to explore the world. Then suddenly she becomes a wife and a mother. Responsibilities pile up, time shrinks, and dreams fade into the background. Morgan lives in a state of silent regret. She does not regret her daughter, not for a single moment, but she does regret the girl she might have become. She regrets the opportunities she missed, the education she never completed, and the life she could have lived differently. Here lies the painful contradiction. How do you tell the world "I regret" without it being interpreted as regret over motherhood itself? How do you mourn what you lost without being accused of ingratitude for what you have? Hoover handles this contradiction with remarkable skill. Through Morgan's inner dialogue, we see her struggle between 2 roles: the devoted mother who loves her daughter fiercely, and the woman who feels she has buried her true self. This leads us to her relationship with Clara. Clara tries to protect her daughter from what she sees as her own mistake, but in the process of protection, she becomes controlling and rigid, denying Clara the chance to live her own experience. The conflict between them is classic, yet deeply layered. A mother seeking protection, a daughter seeking freedom. But Hoover adds another dimension. Clara doesn't just want freedom from her mother, she wants freedom from her mother's fate. She refuses to become like her mother, refuses to give up her dreams, refuses to bury herself the way her mother did. This brings us to her relationship with her father, Chris. In Clara's eyes, her father is the hero, the understanding figure, the one who supports her, the one who does not judge her. Her mother, on the other hand, represents authority, rules, and restrictions. But this perception is built on an idealized image Clara has created in her mind. She does not see her father's flaws because she chooses not to see them. This is natural in teenage relationships with parents, especially if there is conflict with the other parent. Then the tragedy strikes, and Clara's life is turned upside down. Discovering her father's betrayal with her aunt doesn't only cause her the pain of losing him, it shatters the heroic image she had built of him. This results in what psychology calls a double trauma, the trauma of loss and the trauma of discovering the truth. Here we see Clara's reaction, denial. She refuses to believe that her father was unfaithful. She refuses to accept that the heroic image was an illusion, and instead of confronting this painful truth, she resorts to a defense mechanism, placing the blame on her mother. Why does she blame her mother? Because it's easier than facing the truth. Because admitting that her father was a betrayer would mean that all her beautiful memories with him were built on a lie, and that she herself had been living in an illusion. Clara chooses anger over grief. She chooses shouting over silence. This is her way of dealing with pain. We now arrive at the two characters who are physically absent, yet whose presence dominates every event in the novel: Chris and Jenny. Chris, the husband, the father, the betrayer. It is difficult to speak about Chris without feeling anger, especially after what he has done. Yet our analytical task requires us to understand him, not to justify him. Through the memories of Morgan and Clara, we see that Chris was not evil in the traditional sense. He did not set out to harm his family. Rather, as Hoover portrays him, he was a man stuck in midlife, searching for something he had lost. Let us imagine a man who married in his early 20s, became a father while still young, and carried responsibilities heavier than his age. Then he reaches his mid-30s and begins to ask, what about my life? What about my youth? Chris represents those who fear aging, routine, and the loss of excitement. His relationship with Jenny, his wife's younger sister, was not merely a sexual betrayal, but an attempt to return to youth. Jenny embodied everything he felt he had lost: youth, freedom, and spontaneity. Of course, this does not justify his betrayal. Hoover shows us how his selfish choices destroyed two families, and how his pursuit of happiness came at a devastating cost to others. As for Jenny, she is the most complex character of all. She is the younger sister who may have lived in the shadow of her older sister. Morgan was the perfect mother, the perfect wife, so what was left for Jenny? Her relationship with Chris can be interpreted as a search for identity, for distinction, for being the chosen one. But it also reflects the absence of boundaries within family relationships. How can you betray your own sister with her husband? That question lingers throughout the novel. What is remarkable about Hoover's approach is that she does not present Jenny as an absolute villain. Through Morgan's memories, we see her as a loving sister and a caring daughter. This contrast between who she was before the discovery deepens the tragedy. Here, death is not a punishment, but an event that eliminates any possibility of confrontation, apology, or forgiveness. Chris and Jenny disappear while carrying their secrets, leaving the living to suffer the consequences of their actions. Finally, in this section, we turn to Jonas, the character who represents hope in the novel. Jonas is Chris's half-brother, a calm, grounded man who arrives in town after the tragedy. At first, he may seem like a minor character, but he gradually becomes the cornerstone of Morgan's healing process. What distinguishes Jonas is his emotional maturity. He does not try to save Morgan, he simply stands beside her. He offers no magical solutions, he listens. And that is exactly what Morgan needs after her relationship with Chris, who was perhaps emotionally shallow. Jonas represents stability after the storm. He represents a mature relationship after an adolescent one. Through him, Morgan learns that love is not constant excitement, but comfort, understanding, and true partnership. He also represents honesty after deception. Jonas hides nothing and plays no roles. This honesty is what Morgan needs to be able to rebuild her trust in relationships. The relationship between Jonas and Morgan develops slowly and naturally without haste. This mirrors the healing process itself, step by step, day by day. The discovery scene, when everything breaks. This is the moment when everything changes. By chance, Morgan discovers messages between her husband and her sister. The scene is written with rare emotional power. What makes it so devastating is not only the discovery itself, but the moment of realization that follows. Morgan begins to replay the past, the small moments, the subtle signs, the things she chose to overlook. She understands that perhaps she knew, but chose not to know. This raises a painful question. Is ignorance a blessing or a curse? Would it have been better not to discover the truth? Or is truth, no matter how painful, always better than living a lie? The scene ends with Morgan breaking something inside the house, but the real destruction is the shattering of her image of her marriage, her sister, and her entire life. The confrontation between mother and daughter, the conversation that had to happen. After weeks of silence and suppressed anger, the confrontation finally happens. Clara accuses her mother of being responsible for everything, of failing as a wife, of pushing her father into her aunt's arms. We see Morgan move from defense to anger and finally to grief. She is not only trying to defend herself, but also trying to protect Clara from a truth she knows will hurt. What makes this scene powerful is that it is not a battle between right and wrong, but between two wounded hearts. Both are hurting, both are victims, and they hurt each other because that feels easier than facing the deeper pain. The scene ends without resolution, but it opens the door to healing. For the first time, they speak. For the first time, they listen, even through anger and tears. The return to the stage, reclaiming the self. Morgan stands on stage for the first time in years. She trembles, she doubts herself, she wonders if she still can. Then she begins to speak, and with her voice, something inside her comes back to life. This is not an external transformation, but an internal one. Morgan realizes she is not only Clara's mother or Chris's wife, she is Morgan, the girl who once dreamed and the woman who still can. Through acting, she learns that life is like the stage. We play many roles, but we must never forget who we are behind the masks. The final part, questions beyond the pages. We now reach the final part of our episode, where we ask questions that push us to think beyond the pages of the novel. First question, does betrayal erase all the beautiful memories? This is the central question Morgan faces. Were all the warm moments with Chris an illusion? Can true love and betrayal coexist within the same relationship? The novel suggests that life is not simply black and white. Yes, Chris betrayed her, but that does not erase every genuine feeling that once connected him to Morgan. Human relationships are far too complex to be confined to a single label. Second question, who suffers more, the betrayer or the betrayed? Chris and Jenny lived trapped in a cage of fear and lies. Morgan, on the other hand, discovered that the very foundation of her life had been false. Perhaps the pain differs in nature, but the novel focuses on the suffering of those who uncovered the truth, because they are forced to tear down their old world and rebuild it from the ground up. Third question, could Morgan have prevented the tragedy? Many ask, if Morgan had not given up her dreams and maintained her independence, would Chris have betrayed her? At its core, this question is unfair to Morgan. The choice was always Chris's, and she is not responsible for his actions. Here lies a valuable lesson. We cannot control the decisions of others, only our responses to them. Fourth question, was the ending realistic or idealized? The reconciliation between Morgan and Clara and the emerging relationship between Morgan and Jonas, does this truly happen in real life? I believe the ending is not happy in a superficial sense, but rather hopeful. The pain does not disappear and the scars remain, but the heart learns to beat again. And that in itself is deeply realistic. Life goes on, even after the fiercest storms. And so we come to the end of today's episode on Regretting You by Colleen Hoover. What we have explored today is not merely an analysis of a novel, but lessons in the psychological complexity of family relationships, the difficult and gradual process of forgiveness, the search for identity under the weight of social roles, and the strength to keep going even when the heart is broken. Colleen Hoover reminds us that regret is not an enemy to escape from, but a sign of our humanity, that we made mistakes, that we chose, that we lived. And more important than regretting the past is refusing to regret a future we were too afraid to live. Thank you so much for listening, my friends. This was Khalid Atitala Salama, speaking to you from the channel Emotional Library, where words turn into feelings and books become mirrors in which we see ourselves. Target, don't forget to subscribe to the channel Emotional Library. The discovery scene, when everything breaks. This is the moment when everything changes. By chance, Morgan discovers messages between her husband and her sister. The scene is written with rare emotional power. What makes it so devastating is not only the discovery itself, but the moment of realization that follows. Morgan begins to replay the past, the small moments, the subtle signs, the things she chose to overlook. She understands that perhaps she knew, but chose not to know. This raises a painful